Tell me, where do you usually watch my videos? At home, work, or somewhere else?
You'll embarrass me if you show up in white, she said with the kind of forced sweetness that made everyone around the boutique freeze, the words slipping out of her glossy lips like a knife hidden in frosting. Samantha, my baby sister by 4 years, didn't even turn her head to look at me when she said it. She just kept one hand on her mimosa, pinky in the air like some pageant queen, while the other hand held the edge of her gown. As she twirled in front of the mirror, the room, once humming with shallow giggles and synthetic organza, went stone-cold quiet. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, for the other bridesmaids to shift awkwardly in their seats, for the saleswoman to glance between us with the kind of panic you usually reserve for when two dogs start growling in the same elevator. I stood there by the rack of pale beige gowns that looked like old dishwater and pretended to examine one, my fingers brushing the fabric like it might bite me. I hadn't said anything, not yet. I wasn't wearing white. I didn't plan to wear white. I never even thought about it, honestly. I was just here, doing my duty, showing up like she asked. And maybe that was the problem, me showing up at all. That's when it hit me. She didn't want me in white because she didn't want me noticed at all. It's not easy being the big sister when your younger sibling makes every room hers the moment she walks in. And it's damn near impossible when the people in that room already forgot what you've done, just to stand there in one piece. That day in the boutique, I kept quiet. Not because I didn't have a comeback ready, I had 3, but because I realized something. That moment, that dig, that thinly veiled insult in front of her entourage, that was her last card. She'd played it, face up. She didn't want me to shine, not even a little, not even by accident, because if I did, even for a second, it would pull focus from her. And God forbid someone else matter on her wedding day. So I nodded, I sobbed. I even chuckled, pretending I was in on the joke, though I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. Not from shame, but from that low simmering rage that veterans like me learned to keep tucked under the surface. I picked a dress the same color as a manila folder, paid for it myself, and promised her I'd wear it. She looked satisfied, relieved, like she'd won something. Let me back up. The last time I saw my sister before all this, I was in uniform, standing at Arlington Cemetery, watching another soldier get lowered into the ground. He'd been 19, a kid. His mother had collapsed against my arm as they played taps, and I stood still because sometimes being strong means being a wall, even when you feel like you're crumbling inside. I got a Bronze Star 2 weeks later, not that my family mentioned it. It was mailed to me with a certificate that my CO signed with a Sharpie, and I hung it on the wall next to the shadow box of medals I kept under glass. My sister didn't call. My mom sent a text with 3 words. Stay safe, honey. That was the whole response. So maybe you understand why the bridal shop felt like enemy territory. The women in that room weren't interested in who I was or what I'd seen. They cared about flower arrangements and shade-matched high heels. They gushed over calligraphy on invitations like it was a holy text. And when Sam laughed after her "don't wear white" line, they laughed too, tentative at first, then a little too hard, like they'd been waiting for permission to laugh at me all along. That night, I went home, opened my closet, and stared at the plastic-wrapped dress I'd bought that afternoon. It looked like surrender. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat on the edge of my bed, and glanced up at the uniform I'd had pressed just last week for a military function I never got around to attending. It hung there, clean and sharp, every ribbon aligned, every button gleaming. It made the beige dress look like a joke. And that's when the idea took root. Quiet at first, like a breeze under a closed door, then stronger. She said I'd embarrass her if I wore white. What exactly did she think I was going to wear? I didn't answer her texts for the next 2 days. One of them said, "Don't forget the spray tan appointment." Another, "Bridesmaid hair theme is beachy, not severe." I left them unread. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing to say. She'd made it clear what she thought of me. She didn't want me present, just decorative. Something that didn't talk too loud, didn't wear too bright, didn't take any light. The night before the wedding, I laid out my uniform on the bed like a body, polished the shoes, ironed the creases, dusted off the hat. I even pinned the bronze star to my chest and stared at my reflection for a long time. Not because I wanted attention, because I wanted to remember who the hell I was before I walked into a room where that would be ignored. She thought the worst I could do was wear white. She had no idea what was coming. It didn't begin at the bridal shop, and truth be told, it didn't even begin with this wedding. The rot had been there long before champagne flutes and Pinterest boards, long before she ever found the man she now called the love of her life, long before I came home with scars no one asked about and medals no one mentioned. The distance between my sister and me was not the kind that happens overnight. It was the slow, silent kind, like erosion, like something once strong being eaten away by the weather, the years, and the quietly cruel assumptions we let fester in the dark corners of our childhood. Samantha was born 4 years after me, and from the moment she came home in that ridiculous yellow blanket, she was a magnet. People smiled wider when they looked at her, spoke in softer voices, paid more attention. It wasn't jealousy I felt, at least not at first, but more a sense of displacement, like I'd been demoted in some invisible way. As we grew, the patterns were etched deeper. I was the one with scraped knees and science fair medals. She was the one with curls and dimples and that voice that always managed to sound like a question you wanted to answer. I was the helper, the fixer, the one who stayed behind while she floated forward, always somehow with a bit of fanfare. And when something broke, be it a vase, a rule, or someone's trust, I was the one who quietly took the blame, partly out of habit, partly out of instinct, and partly because I knew she'd never survive the weight of consequences. High school came and went with its usual assortment of trials and victories, though mine were mostly invisible ones. I excelled quietly, straight A's, a partial scholarship to a state college, acceptance into ROTC. But it was Samantha who made the local paper, who got elected homecoming queen, who had teachers fawning and boys stumbling over themselves to carry her backpack or buy her smoothies. Our parents, kind, decent people in their own way, didn't intend to play favorites, but favoritism doesn't always look like a punishment. Sometimes it's just attention. Sometimes it's letting one child's light shine brighter while reminding the other not to outshine. When I enlisted full-time instead of finishing college, my mother cried, not out of pride, but worry, and my father, who served in Vietnam, simply nodded, then went outside to mow the lawn. Samantha had barely looked up from her phone. She told me later, with a shrug, that she just didn't understand why I'd choose something so rough, so unfeminine. I think that was the moment it started to shift permanently. My sense of loyalty becoming something more rigid, more solitary, like armor that grew under my skin. Deployments came and went, each one blurring into the next, long months of desert heat and nights under flickering lights, of sand in your boots and blood on your gloves, of camaraderie that meant life or death, not likes or followers. I wrote home, but no one wrote back much. Samantha was busy with her degree in social media marketing, yes, really, and building her lifestyle brand. My mother sent birthday cards with glitter, and my father sometimes forwarded Fox News articles, always with the same subject line, thought of you. But mostly, I was alone. When I was injured in the line of duty, minor, relatively speaking, just shrapnel in the leg and a concussion, it made the military news cycle for about 2 days. I received the Bronze Star not long after, along with a commendation from my commanding officer that made me feel more seen in 5 minutes than I had in 2 decades. I came home quietly, walked through the airport in my fatigues, unnoticed, and found no one waiting at the gate. Samantha didn't post about it. My mother said we should keep things private. My father shook my hand at dinner and then asked me to help move the grill. The wedding invitation came 3 months later, and it wasn't even from her. It was from a male-merged company that forgot to capitalize my name. There was no +1 allowed. The RSVP card had a checkbox that said attending with joy and another that said regretfully declining. I checked the first one, not out of joy, but because something in me felt that old spark of obligation, of duty, not to her, not anymore, but to the version of myself who still believed that family meant something solid, something worth showing up for, even when it didn't feel like it. When I looked at the wedding website, I wasn't listed under bridal party, but under extended guests. My name was misspelled, and the photo she'd uploaded of us was from 10 years ago, one where she looked like a model and I looked like someone who hadn't slept in a week. There were no mentions of my service, no nods to my career, nothing to suggest I was anything more than a face in the crowd. It wasn't just an oversight. It was intentional. It was her erasing me softly, the way a child brushes away chalk on a sidewalk. That night, I pulled out the box with my bronze star and set it on my nightstand. I didn't look at it the way you look at a trophy or a symbol of glory. I looked at it the way you look at a scar, something that proves you were somewhere that tried to break you, but failed. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there and felt the cold press of understanding that no matter what I had done, no matter what I had given, no matter what I had survived, in her eyes, I was still the shadow. And if she wanted to dim me out of the picture, then fine, let her. But I'd walk into that wedding like a storm, not in white, in steel. The evening of the rehearsal dinner unfolded with that strained elegance that clings to events where too many people wear too much perfume and smile too tightly for too long, where every napkin fold and canapé tray carries the weight of weeks of planning and too many unspoken resentments, and where the line between celebration and performance starts to blur beneath the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of polite conversation. I arrived 5 minutes early, not by design, but by habit, because in the Army, 5 minutes early is on time, and on time is late, and was greeted at the door by a college-age hostess with a blank stare and a clipboard, who glanced down at my name, double-checked the list twice like I might be someone crashing the party, then led me to the far corner of a long banquet table where the place cards started to look a little less polished, like someone had remembered my existence just before print deadlines. The restaurant was one of those places that looked expensive mostly because it refused to be cozy. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging in delicate cages, waiters in pressed aprons who didn't smile, but nodded like you were bothering them just by ordering water. And the air smelled like roasted garlic, and the kind of ambition that gets cooked into upscale family events. I sat down quietly, smoothing out the skirt of the taupe bridesmaid dress Sam had picked for all of us. Though mine fit a little off, tighter in the shoulders and too loose at the waist, and watched the slow parade of people file in, each one louder than the last, until Samantha arrived on her fiancé's arm, glowing with that calculated perfection of someone who knows exactly how many eyes are on her. There's a particular kind of power in knowing you don't need to raise your voice to silence a room, and Sam wielded it like a surgeon's scalpel. Her entrance was choreographed down to the tilt of her chin, her laughter spilling just loudly enough to make sure it was heard, but not enough to seem forced. Her hand on Michael's chest in that way that made it look like they were the kind of couple who still took baths together and whispered dreams in the dark. I watched as she made her rounds, hugging people in that practiced way that didn't smudge her makeup, saying just enough to every guest to make them feel chosen, but never so much that they could mistake it for sincerity. When she got to me, she smiled like someone who'd just remembered they left the oven on, brief, distracted, faintly irritated, and leaned down with a kiss that missed my cheek by a good inch. "Glad you made it," she said, already looking past me, already turning to the next cluster of guests, already pulling her fiancé into a circle of cousins who had driven in from Connecticut, just to say they were there. I sat back, took a sip of my drink, and let the conversation swirl around me like fog. Every laugh and every story and every anecdote gently pushing me further out toward the edges of relevance. Dinner was served in courses, tiny portions of overly complicated food arranged like abstract art. And as people drank more wine and loosened their collars, the volume in the room grew, the laughter got louder, and the jokes started to carry more teeth. At one point, A groomsman made a toast where he compared Samantha's sense of control to a drill sergeant's, and the room erupted with laughter while I traced the rim of my glass and wondered if they even understood what a drill sergeant really does. I had learned to live in silence, to make myself small in rooms that weren't built for me, but something about this evening, about the way I was being ignored with such coordinated ease, started to stir that quiet fury that I hadn't felt since basic training, since standing in a sandstorm gripping a rifle with cracked hands while someone screamed about duty and fear and what it meant to serve. The speeches began just after dessert, each one longer than the last, filled with stories of childhood mishaps, college antics, and the kind of filtered nostalgia that always manages to forget anything painful. When it was Samantha's turn to speak, she stood in the center of the room like it was her personal stage, held her wine glass in that graceful way she'd perfected in countless Instagram photos, and began thanking everyone, naming names, showering praise on friends, bridesmaids, groomsmen, even her fiancé's elderly aunt, who had flown in with oxygen tanks, and her third husband. Everyone, that is, except me. Her eyes skipped over mine like a stone across water, glancing, never pausing, and when she finally did acknowledge me, it was with a smile that had no warmth and a sentence that made the room still for just a moment too long. "And of course my big sister Rachel," she said, holding her glass a little higher, "who taught me all about tough love and how to take care of yourself, even if it means combat boots and a heart of steel." There was laughter. Nervous, hesitant at first, then louder, then almost unanimous, like people didn't know what the joke was but assumed it must be funny because she was beautiful and standing in the spotlight. Even my parents chuckled, my father giving a soft shake of the head, my mother lightly touching Samantha's arm in that adoring way she never did with me. And I realized that in this room, I was not a person. I was a punchline. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just lifted my glass, nodded politely, and took a long, slow sip of something that tasted like the end of something I hadn't realized I was still hoping to fix. Across the room, Michael, the groom, met my eyes for the first time that evening. There was something uncertain there, something like an apology he wasn't allowed to speak. And for a fraction of a second, I wondered if he knew, if he understood what she was doing, if he'd seen through her performance and had stayed anyway, or if he, like everyone else in that room, just wanted a wedding more than he wanted the truth. When the applause faded and the music came back on, I stood up quietly, walked past the table, past the half-empty glasses and the still warm plates, past the bridesmaids snapping selfies in the hallway mirror, and stepped outside into the night air, which was cool and sharp and smelled faintly of the ocean. I leaned against the railing, stared up at the stars that didn't seem to care one bit about our speeches and silences, and let my mind settle into something cold and clear. She thought that was the last jab. She thought she'd humiliated me into disappearing, but what she didn't understand, what none of them ever seemed to understand, was that I'd lived through hells she couldn't name, and I had learned how to carry humiliation like armor. I smiled into the dark, not because I was happy, but because I had decided something. Let her shine tomorrow. Let her have her perfect day, but I'd make damn sure no one forgot mine. The morning of the wedding rose slow and golden, the kind of morning that feels like it's been painted into place. Birds chirping too cheerfully, clouds hovering like cotton hung with care, and sunlight pouring through windows like someone turned the brightness up on the whole damn world. And yet, as I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar guest bed in my parents' house, where the sheets still smelled like detergent and dust, I felt no warmth from it, only the creeping chill of calculation that had settled in my chest the night before when I stood outside the restaurant and decided, with unshakable clarity, that today was not going to belong to Samantha entirely. The house was already humming with activity when I padded barefoot down the hall, the scent of hairspray thick in the air, curling irons hissing behind closed doors, the sharp clatter of heels on tile, and the muffled hum of last-minute logistics echoing from the kitchen, where my mother issued orders like a general with a clipboard. I passed her on the way to the garage, and she barely glanced up. busy flipping through a stack of checklists, her mouth moving without sound as if she were praying to the God of perfection that everything would go exactly as planned. I nodded, silent, and slipped outside before anyone asked me to pin a boutonniere or fetch a lost earring. I didn't have the patience to play the quiet helper again. The box was already waiting in the trunk of my car, tucked neatly between the spare tire and the emergency roadside kit, exactly where I had left it the night before, sealed and folded and pressed with the kind of reverence only soldiers truly understand. I opened the lid like opening a casket, slow and deliberate, and stared down at the deep blue fabric, the gold trim, the metals pinned just so, each one representing a story no one had ever asked me to tell. I ran my fingers over the bronze star, polished to a dull gleam, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, the weight of it heavier than any dress, any role, any obligation I'd ever worn for this family. It took time to get ready, not the shallow kind that involves contouring and winged eyeliner, but the kind that demands precision and care, where every button has to align, every crease has to fall sharp, every thread must lie flat. Because when you wear the uniform, you don't just wear clothes. You wear your past, your service, your name stitched across your chest like a truth that no one can talk over. I slicked my hair back into a low bun, tucked the strands tight, fixed my collar, adjusted my medals, stepped into my polished shoes, and finally, after one last glance in the mirror, put on the cap. Driving to the venue was surreal, the kind of surreal that happens when you know the next moment will divide your life into before and after, when the sky seems too bright, the traffic too slow, the songs on the radio too cheerful for what you carry inside. The venue was a country club by the water, manicured lawns stretching into the horizon, white tents fluttering like sails, guests arriving in pastel dresses and suits tailored to impress. I parked far enough to walk, not because I had to, but because I wanted the space, the silence, the ritual of approach. As I crossed the lot and stepped onto the lawn, heads began to turn, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in that sharp, silent way people do when something slices into the rhythm of their expectations. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses hovered halfway to mouths, eyes widened and mouths softened, unsure whether to smile or stare. I walked calmly, heels silent on the grass, hat in hand, ribbons catching the morning light, and for the first time in years, I felt the full weight of my presence, not dulled by a beige dress, not diluted by someone else's narrative, but solid and undeniable, like stone against silk. I didn't speak, I didn't wave, I didn't break stride as I made my way to the second row where family was seated, where my nameplate had not been printed, but where I sat anyway, legs crossed, back straight, the stiff line of my jacket a quiet rebuke to the dozens of gossamer gowns fluttering around me. Samantha saw me before she even stepped onto the aisle, her eyes catching mine from the tent's edge, widening just slightly, the practiced smile faltering for half a breath before she caught herself, lifting her chin higher as if to say she wasn't shaken. But I saw it, everyone did. The music played, soft and sugary, violins weeping with false tenderness, and I sat there, still and quiet, while the ceremony unfolded around me like a scene staged for someone else's movie. The vows began, filled with cliché and trembling joy, her voice high and breathy, his steady and rehearsed, and for a moment I almost forgot why I was there, until the moment her eyes met mine again during the line about love and respect, and something in her faltered, a hesitation so small only someone who'd known her since she was in diapers could have caught it. She blinked, just once, and in that blink, I saw her remember the things she had buried beneath layers of champagne and centerpiece arrangements. The moments I stood beside her in silence after our parents' fights, the secrets I kept for her when she snuck out to meet boys, the clothes I lent her, the apologies I gave in her place, the letters I wrote from desert bases she never read. I saw her remember the sister she had carefully erased from her narrative and now had to face in front of 100 silent witnesses. The room, or rather, the tent, never recovered from my entrance. The air remained thick, charged, every laugh a little quieter, every smile a little tighter, as if people were waiting for something they couldn't name to happen. I didn't disrupt the ceremony. I didn't speak out. I didn't move a muscle except to breathe. And yet somehow, without a single word, I had reclaimed every inch of space she had tried to steal from me. She may have walked down the aisle in lace and lilies, but I had walked through fire and came back standing. And now the whole damn world could see it. The reception, like most post-ceremony affairs, was designed to wash away formality with an abundance of alcohol, soft lighting, and carefully curated moments that would later appear filtered and cropped into perfection across social media feeds. But beneath the clink of champagne flutes and the soft glide of piano music echoing off the polished dance floor, there was a tension so palpable that it clung to the air like humidity. Before a storm, pressing into every conversation, every forced laugh, every sidelong glance cast in my direction. I stood near the entrance for several minutes after the final line of the vows had been spoken, letting the crowd pass by me in small waves, each guest hesitating slightly as they moved past, unsure whether to offer a greeting, a compliment, or to pretend they hadn't seen me at all. Most settled for awkward smiles, the kind that vanish before they fully form, as if afraid of choosing the wrong side in a war they hadn't realized they were attending. I made my way to the reception hall with deliberate steps, feeling the weight of every polished shoe tap against the floor. Not because I wanted to make an entrance, but because I had no desire to rush into a room where every detail had been crafted to forget I existed. The hall itself was a cathedral of curated elegance, towering floral arrangements in shades of blush and ivory, tables draped in silk, name cards penned in gold calligraphy, and a band warming up in the corner with the kind of energy that suggested this was not their first high-dollar wedding. I spotted my parents at a table near the front, seated beside relatives I hadn't seen in years, their faces lit with pride and conversation, until my presence dimmed it just slightly, like someone turning the lights down one notch too low. My father glanced at me, offered a nod, stiff, unreadable, and turned back to his drink, while my mother gave the faintest of smiles, the kind that tried to be warm but collapsed under the weight of embarrassment she didn't want to name. I didn't sit immediately. I circled the edge of the room, pausing at the bar long enough to order something strong but simple, then settled at a table near the back. No name card, of course, just empty space beside a pair of middle-aged second cousins who seemed too engrossed in arguing about wine pairings to notice me. The music started, the appetizers came out, and I watched the celebration unfold like an observer from another world, sipping my drink and chewing slowly while Samantha glided from group to group, her train lifted by bridesmaids like royalty, her laughter pitched just high enough to draw attention from whichever corner of the room wasn't currently looking at her. She didn't glance my way, not once, not even accidentally, and I realized that for someone who claimed to fear embarrassment, she was fighting hard not to betray just how much my presence had thrown her off balance. It was midway through the father-daughter dance, as they swayed stiffly to a James Taylor song chosen more for its lyrics than its rhythm, that she finally broke. I had stepped outside for air, drawn by the ache of confinement more than the need for solitude, standing beneath a string of twinkling garden lights that lined the patio, watching waves brush against the rocks in the distance, when I heard her heels strike the stone behind me, sharp, purposeful, like punctuation. I didn't turn right away. I knew it was her from the rhythm of her walk, from the faint whiff of her perfume, from the way the air seemed to tighten the moment she stepped into it. "You had to do it, didn't you?" she said, voice low but trembling, not with fear but fury, the kind that builds quietly and explodes in corners away from the crowd. I turned, slowly, met her eyes, and didn't flinch. "Do what, Sam? Show up?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only disbelief, only that hollow space where shame lives when it's too proud to name itself. "You knew exactly what that would do. You came in like a damn statue and like some monument to everything I'm not allowed to be today. I tilted my head, measured her words, felt the slow burn of recognition settle in my chest. "You're angry because I showed up as myself," I said. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. "And it ruined the version of today where I was invisible." She looked away, jaw clenched, arms folded across her chest like she was cold, though the night was warm. "I just wanted this day to be about me," she muttered. And there it was, small, wounded, stripped of its armor. "It still is," I replied, and I meant it. "I didn't take anything from you. I just refused to be erased again." She turned back to face me then, and her eyes, for the first time in years, looked exactly like they did when we were kids, unsteady, uncertain, not sure how to argue without the safety net of a crowd. "You always make things about pride, Rachel," she said, softer now. "About duty, about being respected. But not everything is about medals and uniforms." "No," I said, stepping just a little closer so she couldn't look past me anymore. "Some things are about memory, and this wedding, this was going to be the last memory a lot of these people had of me, so I gave them the real one." Behind her, the music shifted into something livelier. A cheer went up from the crowd inside. The wedding rolled on, its wheels turning, its timeline intact. She stood silent, arms slack at her sides, the veil on her shoulder catching the breeze like something ready to fly away. Neither of us spoke again. There was nothing else to say. She turned and walked back inside, steps slower than before, back straighter, but her face unreadable. I remained under the lights a few minutes more, finished my drink, and walked to the parking lot without ceremony, without farewells, without fanfare. In the driver's seat of my car, the uniforms still snug around me, I sat for a moment with the engine off, letting the silence fill the space like fog. Then I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the envelope I had tucked there that morning, sealed and stamped, addressed in my own hand. Inside were my new orders. Another base, another deployment, another chapter where I could be useful, purposeful, maybe even remembered. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I simply started the engine, watched the taillights of the reception flicker smaller in my rearview mirror, and drove into the night. She wanted me gone, I'd be gone again soon. But I knew this time she'd remember me, and I didn't need an invitation to make sure of that.